My name is Jane Clark, and I'm happy to welcome you today to our Capital Connections virtual event. And also a very special thanks to today's program sponsors, our Advocacy in Action mission sponsors. I'd like to turn it over to our guest moderator today, Michael Hill of Coldbrook Insurance Company. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thank you, Jane. Great to be with you this morning. I'm sorry we weren't able to get together in person, but hopefully we will be able to do that soon enough. We've got a full agenda today. We're fortunate to have a great lineup of all of our state legislators with us this morning, and that's what we're going to kick off with because they all are double booked at the moment. So Senator Roger Victory is with us, and he needs to be on the radio in 14 minutes. So Senator Victory, let's start with you. Could you give us an update on what you've been up to and what we can anticipate seeing coming from Lansing from your perspective?
Yes, good morning. Is my audio coming in?
Loud and clear.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. One is I just want to start out this meeting is keeping Congressman Huizenga and his family in mind. Bill lost his sister to a fight with cancer, and it's something that, the Huizenga family has had a number of losses in their family. So just kind of keep them in our prayers as we go forward as they suffer the loss of his sister due to cancer. So just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. And sometimes that information with COVID, it's sometimes not communicated throughout. So, but with that there on a brighter note, was glad to hear that Moderna had a 95% efficacy rate with their vaccine. And the reason I start out with that is so there's light at the end of the tunnel, but while that light at the end of the tunnel, we do have several months of increasing COVID rates throughout the state of Michigan. And then thus we had what the governor instituted yesterday with her Department of Health and Human Services, some rules and regulations coming, and it's going to affect a lot of our business community. I guess I'll just encapsulate my frustration with the action of the governor is, I'll highlight, as Farmer Raj, I knew about this pending announcement, and I did not know about it through Senator Raj. So Senator Victory did not have any indication of what was coming, but yet through my business connections, I knew what was coming down the pike. And I think that kind of encapsulates the overall frustration of the legislative body is as we face this issues of COVID and we see the increasing numbers, we would like to be more of a collaborative method at it and not being at the sideline on the table. So with that summary, I realize a lot of our business community is going to be affected by this. We're going to continue to work with our business community, see what can be done. But my overall philosophy is our business, we wear our mask, we make sure we have proper protocol in, we continue to amp up on it. And it's as we probably each of us on this call probably know somebody with COVID or had COVID. And with that personal connection, we continue to be smart about it and continue to use best practices. So that's kind of my summary of the COVID situation. There are some things with the budget going forward. We're still a little unknown what our future budget is going to be with this kind of more of a shutdown of the economy. I'm sure that's going to have some impact, but we'll also be looking at Washington, D.C. too to see where our future budget aspects come into play and with how we're going to do that process. So overall, a lot of unknowns out there, but with it, we're going to continue to listen to our constituents, address their needs, and if there's any specific issues, please feel to be able to reach out to any of your representatives or Senate offices. So with that, that is my kickoff for the morning meeting.
Thank you, Senator Victory. Before I let you go, just you appreciate your comments on the actions that the governor's taken. My understanding is both the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House either last evening or this morning announced that they were displeased with the approach the governor's taken as well. Could you just offer some insight in terms of things that you would prefer that the governor would have done or steps that you think the governor should have taken before the ones she took last night?
Yeah, and when these decisions are being implemented, what parameters are they using? What science are they using? I would appreciate being able to sit down and with our committee chairs and those who have specific areas of expertise, come in with a dialogue with the governor, and at least even for one day, and then see we can be using a collaborative method going forward. But it just seems to be more of an ad hoc method of what, where, how, and when these ad hoc methods of the governor of shutting this down, keeping that open, you pick winners and losers, and when the losers, that's affecting some livelihood of some business. And is there some other, as you know, we have restaurants that will be open. Yeah, out for outside. It's November. Who is going to be eating outside in November? And the component. Is there some other method that we can hit those goals? Because remember, we have the vaccine coming. It's going to be a matter of months with that starting to be implemented. And that's another area I believe we should be discussing with the governor at this point in time. When the vaccine comes available, how is it going to be distributed throughout the state of Michigan? Who's priority or this or that? I believe we should be having those discussions right now and not waiting for a crisis to occur to see how that's going to be done. So that's another example. We need reach out to the governor. Can we have a dialogue going forward and making sure we got best practices being implemented for all the Michiganders, and especially for West Michigan, who we represent on this call.
Thank you very much for that. Senator Nesbitt, it looks like you've been able to join us as well. So Roger, Senator Victory, appreciate you being with us, and we may come back to you with a question, but if you drop off at 10:15 for your radio spot, we understand. Senator Nesbitt, do you have any updates to share with us?
I wasn't able to listen to Senator Victory's much, but because I was on HTC before, and I think at 9:30, I think he's going on to WHTC at 10:30.
Well, he basically said this was all your fault.
Yeah, well, I could see that that happening, but no, I think there's some reminders is that as I look at what's taken place. I know there's the big news yesterday, and as I look at it is that I think the we look at it, coronavirus is on the rise, and we continue to see how troubling that is. So citizens do need to take extra cautious steps to protect the vulnerable, their loved ones, their family, and their neighbors, whether it's social distancing, restricting, family gatherings, et cetera. But the governor continues to refuse to partner with the legislature instead of sharing her plans. Instead, she's been sharing her plans since the end of last week with lobbyists, well before talking to the elected representatives of the people. And I think the policy she and her executive agencies really have unilaterally implemented, I think have failed Michigan's, residents, whether it's been placing COVID positive patients in with COVID negative patients, failed at securing enough personal protective equipment. I do think that people want collaboration and work instead of this go it alone approach. And so I'm just hopeful that, and again, I've been hopeful since the beginning that she'd actually be on calls with the legislators asking, that we're all in this together, how to work through this. But once again, let me point out another thing, besides the COVID, and there has been some good news over the last week in terms of Pfizer's announcement last Monday, Moderna's announcement this morning. You're talking 2 vaccines that are 90 to 95% effective. 95% effective is pretty close to the gold standard on vaccine effectiveness, which is exciting to see. But again, not many doses will be ready because there's still more FDA clearance to go through. Operation Warp Speed really has, when we first started, they're saying, it's going to be 4 to 5 years for a vaccine. It's pretty exciting that there's, another 10 in development to have these kind of initial results. And I think that's pretty exciting to see that hopefully by the third quarter, fourth quarter next year, that worldwide, we might be able to getting back closer to normal, traditional normal. But another example that I think members of the chamber would like to know is the decision last week by the governor to sue Enbridge to shut down a critical energy pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac. This is something which is very troubling, not just for the Upper Peninsula and how they're going to get their propane and natural gas and what's needed for heating, but also along with our refineries here in Michigan and Ohio, and the harm that'll do for both the supply security that we have and the increased prices. They've been trying to slow down and stop a $500 million energy investment here in the state of making sure there's a double-walled tunnel that would limit any real environmental impact in the straits for this tunnel. And something that they miss is that people are going to continue to use energy. How are you going to get that energy? And pipelines are traditionally the safest and lowest cost per, item in terms of delivering the energy that we need. Usually it's pipelines, then it's boats, barges, and then it's trains, and then it's semi trucks, and the cost is, the cost goes up whether you're using, if you're using a semi instead of using the pipelines, and same with the safety challenges. And so, again, no heads up to the legislature. Continued, continue work to close down this energy infrastructure, which is very troubling.
Thank you, Senator Nesbitt. We appreciate that update. I'm going to transition over to Representative Lilly, who is pulling double duty at the moment, and see if he can give us a brief update from the House side.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Sorry, I'm actually on a conference call here too, so I'm muting that. I'm turning that off, making sure I'm on mute there, and switching over to you guys. So yeah, thanks for the update. On the House side of things, obviously we had a lot going on with respect to the election. Recently, the Senate has the luxury of only being up every 4 years. The House is up every 2. So we just completed an election cycle. We were able to hold on to majority in the House, so the House will be a Republican majority for the 101st legislature here from 2020 on through 2022. And so we're in the process of dealing with that transition. So again, unlike the Senate, every 2 years we're up. We have term limits in the House, so generally our leadership changes over every 2 years. And so we'll be electing a new speaker here in January. It's going to be a gentleman by the name of Jason Wentworth. He and I co-chair the House Republican Campaign Committee together, so we work very closely on a regular basis. I did not run for an elected leadership position this time around, but it was just announced in conjunction with the appropriations chair position that I'll be the chair of a newly created committee that's called the Rules and Competitiveness Committee. So it's somewhat, it basically replaces the existing Ways and Means Committee in the House, and we'll have some unique responsibilities, which I'm not talking a lot about yet, but it will be a slightly different structure than the House has seen before. It will be fairly influential committee going forward in the 101st legislature. So looking forward to working on that. We've got lame duck coming up here. So we've probably got about 8 to 9 legislative days left for the session, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in that period of time, I think last lame duck, we passed around 600 bills. I don't expect it will be anything close to that this time around, but even just last week, there was a new bill package introduced dealing with some public notices and allowing for some flexibility rather than looking at sort of requiring publication in local printed newspapers, allowing for websites and other things like that, sort of modernizing that, which is something that's going to be, I think, have a lot of support from local communities, but probably not a lot of support from local papers that were getting that revenue. And so ultimately, that is something that we'll take a look at. That was over 120 bills in that one package that were introduced here last week. And so if that does move, that may be a large portion of the number of bills that are moving in lame duck. But there's a number of other issues that we're taking a look at as well, and we'll have to see sort of what ends up sort of coming through. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have too about what's going on in the House.
Great, thank you, Representative Lilly. We do have a question and like to get some feedback from both you and Senator Nesbitt, if at all possible. So one of the big challenges that we're hearing from the leaders of our schools is it's not so much that COVID is what's closing them down in the school buildings themselves, but people being exposed and then lack of teachers and substitute teachers. Is there anything that you think that could be done at the state level to lower the bar, for example, that's needed to be considered a substitute teacher in the short terms, that we can keep students in the classroom if at all possible?
Yeah, I know that's something that Chris Glass has been reaching out to me on, and it's something that he and I have worked on in the past, attacking it from an angle of allowing some folks who maybe are retired to get back into the system in some of these areas to address that critical shortage. And I think that that's something that is something we could take a look at. I do have a bill over in the Senate Appropriations Committee now dealing with a very specific critical shortage issue for sort of literacy coaches in the Reading Now, sort of dealing with Reading Now Network stuff here in West Michigan. I think that bill could probably be expanded to account for some of that. But again, that's something I know Chris is working on, and certainly I'm supportive of those efforts. And that was something that we were working on prior to the pandemic, but certainly in the midst of the pandemic makes it even more relevant and important.
Senator Nesbitt, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's some good ideas in terms of trying to keep students in the classroom. I do appreciate that still allowing K through 8, pre-K through 8, because I think that's important for definitely people getting to work and families that don't have real high incomes and have many options to work. But I'm always willing and able to decrease some of the regulatory burdens, and how do we continue to forge along to ensure that our students have an education. It's interesting to see Western Europe with their surge that's going on also, that they're not shutting down schools and universities like they were doing this last this last spring. I think people understand that having access to education long term is very important, and we understand that that the driving force in terms of the health effects of COVID is age, underlying health conditions, weight, and vitamin D deficiencies, and that younger children, from most of the research I've read and the medical professionals I've talked to, don't really spread it as much as older folks do, and really don't have much in terms of symptoms that older folks have. And so I think that's something where, if at all possible, we need to continue to keep our schools open, and always open to have those regulatory changes that are needed.
So Senator Nesbitt, I'm going to go back to Representative Lilly, but then also have a similar question for you. Representative Lilly, if we can run one more question by you, because at the moment you're the only representative from the House here with us. So last Wednesday and Thursday, the House elected not to meet because largely driven, I believe, by one of your members testing positive for COVID. But the response from your spokesman was that there wasn't overly pressing time-sensitive issues in front of the House at the moment, and so there was no need to meet on Wednesday and Thursday. Keeping kids in the classroom and finding adults who can help teach them seems like a pretty pressing issue. What sort of things besides that do you see as pressing? I mean, we're in the thick of it right now, so what's it going to take to see some other action out of the legislature to address specific issues like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, the issue that we run into, Mike, is that, all the legislature can do is pass laws, and if the governor isn't going to sign those laws, then there's not a whole lot of effort, that we can go about that makes sense. I mean, we have some oversight authority, things that we can look into and expose without buy-in from the executive office. But that's really been the issue, which I think Senator Nesbitt and Senator Victory hit on, which is we are trying to have conversations with the governor's office about how to address some of these things, but ultimately we are sort of getting shut out, and they really don't have a lot of interest in talking with us about what solutions are. So, until they actually come to the table and say, we want to work with you on some of these issues, I don't know that there's a lot of point in us passing plans and, propose new laws that don't have the buy-in of the administration. And that's sort of the box that we're in at the moment, which is, look, until some of these, discussions, which frankly are not happening the way that they should, because the governor's office doesn't have an interest in having them. I don't know that there's a lot of point in us bringing a lot of people together unnecessarily to pass, legislation that hasn't been negotiated, and that the majority of COVID-related items that we have sent to the governor, have basically been, vetoed or ignored, and that's not a productive situation for us.
Got it. Thank you very much for that clarification. Senator Nesbitt, do you have anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Unmute. There we go. I think there's a good point that Representative Lilly makes, but also the House Republicans introduced a COVID response plan last month. And again, not much coverage by the media. Governor didn't really have much in terms of negotiations to do with it. Senate issued one there the end of April when we were trying to negotiate, furthering some of the emergency orders to try to find a landing spot that actually works. And again, the governor had no inclination to negotiate and try to figure out. At the end of the day, I sit on the COVID Joint Committee that's in the House. It's both House and Senate members. I probably sat through over 50 hours worth of hearings. I've probably had nearly 120 people that have testified. And really, the trope, including the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, the governor's chief medical officer, the state's chief epidemiologist, and each one of them I've asked, what's the science and data that they're using to close down X business or Y business or reopen X business when? Why were casinos open the beginning of August, but arcades, again, small, this isn't 1980s, we don't have thousands of arcades all over the place, but arcades were still closed till the middle of October. And so it's one of those things that I think we're messing up when, instead of challenging the private sector and private actors to do the right thing, that we're trying to shut them down. And I think until really a vaccine arrives, stopping the spread is going to come down to people making smart decisions to protect themselves, their families, and the vulnerable. And I think we have pushed through better standards to protect those in nursing homes. The governor vetoed it twice. We finally got it, got it through middle of October through negotiated. We supported more PPE for our frontline workers, testing and local flexibility to handle the spikes that we've passed in the legislature, encourage safe protocols. And just a little reminder too, the governor has that bully pulpit and is always in the media. It's a little harder for myself or Representative Lilly or individual legislators to get much, that same kind of attention in terms of saying even all 110 in the House or 38 in the Senate. But we all need to be working together and doing what we can individually to stop the spread and help areas in need. But as a reminder, it's not through institutions and businesses and educational places, it's in these social situations. And that's something where it's beyond really government control. It's about individuals making smart and safe and right decisions.
Perfect. So I appreciate that insight, Senator Nesbitt. Could you possibly, last question for you, and you're our last elected official with us at the moment, so that's why we keep sending them back your way. But through the 50 hours of testimony that you've sat through, if the governor called today and say, hey, we're willing to talk and let's get some additional bills passed, what do you see as the things the low-hanging fruit that could be passed and agreed upon generally right away?
Yeah, I think there is further. I think what was brought up earlier in terms of further flexibility for some of our, whether it's schools or daycares, what kind of flexibilities are needed in terms of to do the safe protocols that are out there. And also, I think there's some expansion. I think one of these areas is allowing better telemedicine that's there. There's some legislation we can pass on that. Governor's office has been reluctant on opening that up. And also in terms of licensures of medical professionals from other states, of being able to work in Michigan, either in person or through telemedicine, such as the nursing compact. I think Representative Whiteford had that bill that passed out of the House. It's in the Senate. I'd love to see that pass, but I'm hearing there's pushback from the administration. But again, these nurses that are traveling, and as we've seen in the United States, there's different hotspots in different places and different regions. And I think it'd be very useful and helpful of making sure these health professionals would be able to work in Michigan as we continue to see these spike in cases. And so my hope is that's probably one of those bills that should be first on that perspective.
Fantastic. We appreciate that insight, and I believe you've got another radio spot staring you in the face here too. And so, Senator Nesbitt, we'll use this as our opportunity to say thank you very much, and we appreciate the efforts that you are doing on our behalf in Lansing. And we'll dismiss you and move on to our next agenda item.
Thank you. Have a good day, and God bless.
Same to you. Well, shifting gears here now to a more federal perspective, we're fortunate to have Kevin Courtois with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He's the Executive Director of Congressional and Public Affairs, and he's going to give us an update from their perspective on how the election went. And so, Kevin, are you with us?
I sure am.
Awesome. Well, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me once again. Thanks to you and to Jane for your leadership in Western Michigan. And Jane, thank you for your leadership nationally in what I call Chamber world, but serving on our committee of 100, the U.S. Chamber. We appreciate all that you're doing to help us at a federal level. And as always, appreciate your partnership. So,
hey, could I interrupt you real briefly? I think that's worth noting. We are pretty fortunate in the leader that we have in Jane Clark. Could you just share with those on the call what the Committee of 100 is?
So the Committee of 100 is a collection of what I call or think of as the most elite chamber executives from across the country. And so this committee, which Jane was invited to join, helps guide our organization, at a policy level, sharing best practice. This is a group who, especially during the COVID pandemic, meets very regularly for updates and for input, and helps guide what we're doing at a federal level. You're probably sick of hearing about the election at this point, almost 2 weeks out, but I think we'll do a quick recap and then talk about a little bit of what we're thinking at the U.S. Chamber. When we look at election and the results, of course, it's, we knew that it would take a little time to get, full results. And quite frankly, there are still some races that are outstanding or haven't been called yet. And then we have some important Senate races down in Georgia that have gone to a runoff. But when I take a look at kind of a snapshot of election night, of course, we were delivered kind of split results. So, of course, Joe Biden won the White House. So we're going to see a change there. But voters also delivered, wins for Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they've picked up 11 seats and with a few still outstanding. So we're going to see a slimmer Democratic majority in the House. And then I mentioned 2 Senate races that are going to runoffs in Georgia. It is our belief that at the end of the day, we'll end up with a Republican Senate. So maintaining a pro-business majority in the Senate, which was a key priority for the chamber. Specifically in Michigan, some of the results, as you all know by now, we didn't see any big surprises in the House. Some of the more moderate or what you might think of as vulnerable members were able to hang on to their seats. And we saw Alyssa Slotkin and Haley Stevens out east. And then, of course, Fred Upton, who's just been a real champion of business, carries a strong bipartisanship message, was a recipient of our bipartisanship award earlier this year. He was able, to pull off a decisive victory there. So that's good to see. And then in the Senate race, of course, Gary Peters was able to hang on to his seat. And then as a result, nationally, we saw a slimmer majority in the House for the Democrats, and then what we think will be a Republican Senate moving into next year. Interestingly, Joe Biden will be the first Democratic president to enter his presidency without his party controlling the Senate. First president since 1884, first Democratic president, the first president overall in the last 30 years. So typically, president's will go into his first term enjoying some, majority support in the Senate, able to push through policies. But I think this is going to shape how we see kind of the next 2 years playing out. Big picture, we saw record turnout, which is always a good thing. We saw record spending, the amount spent in Michigan, $167 million on just that Senate race alone. Additionally, we saw a lot of the members and problem solving in the House, or a lot of these kind of centrist members hang on to their seats. Why this is important. So moving ahead, when we have a divided government, it's an effort the U.S. Chamber has to kind of rebuild the middle. And right now that's going to be more important than ever to be engaging with those members of Congress and helping them help the business community in the issues that matter most to us. Divided government, it's not going to be one party pushing through all of their, their policy hopes and getting that through, which quite frankly, some were anticipating, with a Biden presidency, potentially complete Democratic control. If Republicans do keep the Senate, then there will be the need for compromise in order to get anything meaningful done. Looking at what this all means for after the elections, so we're going to move into a lame duck session now, which is actually already started. And what we're prioritizing is a phase 4 COVID relief bill. So if we rewind to March when the CARES Act passed, $3 trillion of spending, Congress has kind of taken time off since then, right? The House passed a bill in May, an additional $3 trillion, but we haven't seen any meaningful progress toward negotiating a phase 4 relief bill. Senator Victory talked about kind of that light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to get there. And what we saw in the CARES Act was some programs like the PPP that were meant to be a bridge to that light at the end of the tunnel, to the other side. And what we're experiencing is it was more of a pier rather than a bridge, because we're seeing the fall off and in a K-shaped recovery where some industries are thriving and doing okay, others are not. So for some of those that are still left behind, what we want to see is meaningful action and targeted action taken in a phase 4 relief bill through programs like the PPP, expanding and revising that program, including some state and local funding. I know budget concerns at a state and local level, are real. When you think about some, for example, infrastructure investment, we weren't driving for some time, and that those funds going into the state coffers, won't be replenished. We're just not going to see that. So while we see, state and local governments struggling to meet some of their, demand through their budgets, hope to get some state and local funding included there. A key part of this and our top priority in getting a phase 4 relief bill done is liability protection. And I think you're finally going to start hearing this kind of bubble up as a key part of what any type of COVID relief package includes. I think some of the other big funding things were real headline grabbers before the election, but now what we've been pushing for is liability protection for businesses, because we know businesses who are trying to do the right thing, following federal, state, and local guidelines, keeping their employees safe and their customers safe, but they're also dealing with a virus, right? So this is how it spreads and where it spreads. It's difficult to determine. And so businesses operating, doing the right thing, what we're looking for is some timely, targeted, and temporary liability protections so they cannot be turn around and be sued for either providing those protections or not providing those protections. It's an interesting dynamic we see out there where businesses are being sued from both sides for not doing enough or doing too much to enforce some of these safety guidelines. So what we're hearing from our members is what they need is that liability protection, especially when it comes to something like a global pandemic and a virus where it's difficult to nail down, where one might actually contract this.
So Kevin, to dive more into the liability, that's it's been a hot topic, at least on the Republican side of for the next relief bill. What is the likelihood that you think that some liability protections are going to be included in round 4 that you reference?
So I think the key here is to really look to Leader Mitch McConnell in the Senate, so Republican leader. He has said that any bill that goes through the Senate will have liability protection. So he's not going to bring a vote to the floor without liability protection. We want to pay attention to leadership, likely at all levels, but especially the federal government, where if Leader McConnell is going to go to the table, and he has said, along with Speaker Pelosi, that both have said after the election that this is a top priority, which is why I'm hopeful it can get done in a lame duck session, that I think they understand the urgency of this, and especially now that we're looking at a new wave and new local kind of restrictions being implemented. Both have said that this is a priority, and then I look to Leader McConnell's previous comments where no piece of legislation will pass the Senate without including liability protections. We engaged in an effort to connect with Democratic leaders or lawmakers in the House who might be willing to help us push this message with leadership. And this is where it's really important, is we know that the Republican Senate would be behind this, and we need to, work with Democratic leadership in the House to convince them of an importance of including some type of legal protection. I think at the beginning you received pushback that, this isn't a blanket immunity from any type of liability, but that it's timely, targeted, and temporary, that what the business community is asking for is something limited in scope to the pandemic. We're not looking to reform, we're not looking for large-scale legal reform. We want something that's targeted to the pandemic, hoping that that message gets through and that we're able to get that to the Democratic House leadership so that we can include, very targeted piece of liability protection in there. So I'm hopeful that'll get done, and that a package will get done, and that Leader McConnell looked at his words that it won't pass without liability protection.
So if you had to handicap this and place a bet on the likelihood of something happening during lame duck, what is the percentage that you think that something's actually going to happen?
Yeah, I try to avoid giving percentages, not my favorite thing, but I would say it's given comments from leadership. I would say we have a more than 50% chance of getting this done. And so I'm taking them at their word that this is a priority and they understand the urgency of it. And especially when you look at the fact that we've gone months now without them addressing the issue. Someone might say you look at an election and there's different reasons why, there's different interests before an election. Well, now the election's over. So now it's time to get back to work. And, we have all of that time that's built up where, businesses and individuals have really needed some assistance. So it's time for them to step up. So I think we have a decent chance at getting this through. I think it would be, where I haven't seen comments from President-elect on this, but I would imagine that he would want something like this taken care of so that he can then, focus on other issues right away, or on implementing the relief bill once he's there, instead of having to then work with Congress to get something through. That will take up more time. So probably communicating what he wants to see in this with Democratic leadership at the moment is likely what's going on, so that his administration can be ready to get right into implementation once they're there.
Perfect. You mentioned this briefly, but just a follow-up question. Do you expect the chamber to play any role in the races going on in Georgia?
I do, yes. So we have an active PAC, we're an active political program. There is going to be a lot of money poured into Georgia, over the next couple of months. And as we work with our political program, seeing how to be most effective and sharing that message. So Senator Perdue, current U.S. Senator, he had, I haven't seen the latest numbers, just under 50%. So in Georgia, they have a rule where the candidate has to receive 50% in order to be declared, a winner. And he got just under 50%. There was I think it was a Libertarian candidate on the ticket, which brought his vote total down. But I expect him to do well in this election. He was almost there. Senator Kelly Loeffler, was an appointed senator in Georgia, she wasn't as high of a mark. So there were two Republicans running in that race. A popular Republican congressman was running kind of to the right of where Loeffler was, and so they kind of split Republican votes there. And so I think what we're shaping up to see, I would anticipate both sitting senators winning re-election, but it's going to be a fierce battle there in Georgia, and I don't envy Georgians and what they're about to endure in terms of political advertising. But we will be active in seeing how we can best engage and help keep a pro-business majority in the Senate.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I think I did kind of interrupt you as you were working through your bullet points. So are there any other items that you want to make sure that our membership is aware of that the Chamber's working on?
So we talk a lot about COVID relief, as we should. And again, that's the top priority. Then you have to think through what else will Congress and the new administration do? And so I'll leave you with just a couple thoughts on, with the assumption of a Republican majority in the Senate, what can possibly get done. This is what I expect to see. First, on the administrative side, from a President Biden and his administration, we're going to see a lot of strong regulatory action at the beginning, which quite frankly we see from any new president from an opposite party, where a lot of the action that's taken, Congress has delegated a lot of authority, and we see regulatory action. We saw it with Obama, especially toward the end of his presidency when we had divided government. He did a lot of the policy making through regulatory action and executive orders. And we saw President Trump come in and undo a lot of that, a lot of those policies, and implement his own policies through regulatory action and executive order. So I think we can anticipate seeing President Biden do exactly the same, reverse a lot of what President Trump has done, and look to get a lot of things done, especially with divided government, through those regulatory actions. So the president-elect he campaigned as a consensus builder, and he prides himself on having that history in the Senate. I think it's going to be interesting to seeing if he's able to do that in a new divided government. There are certain issues that I think are primed to move forward under divided government. First of that being infrastructure. We've started a campaign to urge Congress to pass meaningful infrastructure investment by July 4th. So that's not only bridges and roads, which is important, but also things like broadband. One of the key takeaways, I think, from this pandemic and how we've kind of evolved or responded is that a lot of areas are lacking access to broadband, and how businesses and schools and other institutions stay up and running and able to connect. So some type of infrastructure investment, I think is, that's going to be our next priority after COVID relief. I think it's something where both parties have demonstrated support, and it'll come down to how we're going to pay for this, which is an important conversation to have. And yes, we do need to pay for it. But I think that's a key issue where they may start looking for actually getting something through in divided government. We're going to, I mentioned kind of the regulatory actions. I think we'll see the new administration perhaps using enforcement as a policy tool. So a lot of businesses do, the government buys a lot of stuff, goods and services. And so through contracts, things like that, they're able to kind of implement some of those policies by putting requirements in for private actors in those types of situations. After infrastructure, I think we may turn our attention back to workforce, seeing some meaningful progress getting done there. If you remember, probably last time we were talking, it may have been the number one issue. It certainly was across the region and across the country, was with low unemployment that we were enjoying before COVID, was finding workers and getting them skilled up for those positions in a growing economy. And of course, we want to be in a growing economy, and we want to, continue that growth especially once we're all through this. So I think workforce will be another issue where we'll be able to make some meaningful progress.
Awesome. Kevin, that's fantastic. We appreciate the work that you're doing on our behalf at the national level. And we've just hit almost our time limit. So I'd like to invite Jane back to wrap up our meeting this morning. Jane?
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Kevin. What a great summary of what is happening in Washington, D.C. and the outlook ahead. So really, really appreciate that. Mark your calendar. Our next Advocacy in Action event is going to be our virtual coffee with our Congressman Bill Huizenga, coming up on Monday, December 14th. That'll be at 10 a.m. So stay safe, everyone. You know the rules. Wash your hands, social distance, wear a mask, and have a great day. Thanks for joining us.